Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into a book that's practically legendary in the business world, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. You've probably heard of it, maybe even skimmed a summary or two.
Oh, definitely a classic.
But trust me, this book, it's packed with insights that are worth revisiting. And the best part, it's not just for tech startups anymore.
That's right.
It's become like a guiding philosophy for, well, anyone really, from those Fortune 500 execs to, anyone who wants to shake things up and bring fresh ideas to life.
Yeah, I mean, the lean startup, it really did flip the script on how we think about building businesses. Remember those old school business plans? The
Hmm.
ones we used to spend months on, based on hunches and projections and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Rees, he basically says, toss those out. Get out there and actually test your ideas. Validate what you're thinking in the real world.
So true. Let's dig into that a bit. Imagine this. You're totally stoked about a business idea, right? You pour your heart and soul into creating this perfect product. Launch it with a bang, and then crickets.
Crickets. Nobody seems interested.
Ouch, yeah, every entrepreneur's
The
nightmare.
worst, right. Well, that's exactly why Rise wrote The Lean Startup, to help us dodge that bullet.
Exactly. Instead of pouring tons of time and resources into something based on guesswork, he's all about starting small. Start with a minimum viable product, he says, your MVP. It's like the bare bones version of your product, just enough to get it in front of customers quickly. And, most importantly, to start testing those assumptions. And this is where it gets really interesting. Rees doesn't just talk the talk, he backs it up with these amazing examples of companies, some you'll know, some you might not, that launched with these surprisingly simple MVPs. Think Groupon, for example.
Groupon, great example.
They didn't start with some fancy software platform. Nope, their MVP. Handmade PDFs, believe it or not,
Yeah.
and a blog post offering a pizza deal, just to people in their own office building.
It's amazing how many big companies started with something so simple.
And we all know how that story goes, right? Total snowball effect, turned into a billion-dollar company.
It's proof that you don't need a perfect product to be successful. You just need to start. And that's really what's so cool about the lean startup method. It's not just for tech companies or these Silicon Valley unicorns.
Right.
Race's point is that it works for any group, big or small, that's trying to tackle something new, something uncertain. It could be a small startup, a team inside a huge corporation, even a government agency trying to innovate.
It's so true. It's empowering, actually, because it means anyone, no matter what their job is or what industry they're in,
Hmm.
can use these principles. I love that.
Yeah. And, it's especially important because, as Reese points out, that traditional top-down management style, it often doesn't cut it when things are uncertain.
Totally. It's like trying to steer a speedboat through a hurricane with a map from 1982.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. A perfect example of this is Intuit, the company behind TurboTax and QuickBooks. They were doing really well, successful company, but they were hitting a wall in terms of innovation.
Right. They kind of realized that to stay ahead of the game, they needed to inject some of that startup energy back into their DNA, right?
Exactly. And you know what they did? They started empowering these small teams within the company, giving them the freedom to experiment and test their ideas.
Reeses calls them islands of freedom, which, I don't know, I just love that phrase.
Yeah.
It's about creating these little pockets of autonomy where innovation can actually blossom.
Yeah, and one of the best examples of this is the story of SnapTax. A small team within Intuit had this idea for a mobile app, let people file their taxes from their phones.
Which sounds like a no-brainer now, but at the time, revolutionary.
Oh, yeah. But the thing is, they were able to bring that idea to life, even inside a massive organization like Intuit, because they had that space, that freedom to operate like a lean startup.
It all comes back to that idea of validated learning, doesn't it? That's where the lean startup really clicked for me. It's not just about building what we think people want. It's about getting out there and actually, testing those assumptions in the real world. And Rees, he's got this great story about his own company, actually.
IVU, right?
Yeah, IMVU, the avatar-based social platform. Talk about ahead of their time, right? With that whole metaverse
They
thing.
were way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
But it definitely hit some bumps in the road.
Oh, I bet. So what happened?
Well, they started with this assumption that people would mainly use IMVU to connect with their existing friends, right? So they built this whole intricate system where you had to download this instant messaging add-on and, get this, invite your friends before you could even try the platform.
Wow, talk about a barrier to entry.
I know, right?
It's like they overthought it. You're so busy building the perfect product that you forget about what users actually need.
Exactly. And guess what happened when IMVU launched with this approach?
Let me guess, total flop.
Total flop. Turns out, people weren't really interested in using it to connect with their existing friends.
Fascinating. But isn't that a good thing, in a way? I mean, that's where validated learning comes in, right? Even through failure.
100%. It's like that saying, fail fast, fail often.
So what did they do? Did they just give up?
No way. They did the opposite. They took that failure and used it as fuel. Went back to the drawing board, talked to their users, really observed how people were actually interacting with the platform.
And through that process of like iterating and testing, they stumbled upon a key insight, right?
Exactly. They discovered that people weren't using IMVU to connect with existing friends. They were using it to make new ones.
Which, thinking about it, makes total sense.
Right.
Avatars, they provide this layer of anonymity, this safety, which makes it way easier to connect with people you don't already know.
It's like a whole new level of social interaction.
So their initial assumption, even though it seemed logical at the time, was totally off base.
Completely. And if they hadn't been open to testing that assumption and pivoting based on that real-world feedback.
Who knows where they'd be?
Exactly. Who knows? But that one discovery that users were craving those new connections, it completely changed their trajectory. They went from almost failing to acquiring millions of users.
Wow. It really shows you how powerful validated learning can be. It reminds me of another great example, Zappos. When they first started out, they basically had this one assumption they wanted to test.
What was that?
Would people actually be willing to buy shoes online, but only, and this is key, only if they had an amazing, a truly superior shopping experience? And you have to remember, this was before online shopping was like a thing, right?
Right. Huge unknown. And their MVP? So smart, so simple. They didn't waste time building some fancy e-commerce website. They didn't overstock on inventory.
They just, took pictures of shoes at local stores?
Basically, took pictures, posted them online, and if someone placed an order, they'd literally go to the store, buy the shoes, and ship them out.
It seems almost too simple to work.
But that's the beauty of it. That bare-bones approach, it let them validate their core assumption without risking a ton of money up front. And once they proved that the demand was there, well, then they could scale with confidence.
And scale they did. That simple little experiment, that was the foundation for them becoming the online shoe giant they are today, which ultimately led to that billion-dollar acquisition by Amazon.
Talk about a success story. And it all goes back to the MVP.
Yeah.
That concept of not aiming for perfection right away,
Right.
it can be so freeing for entrepreneurs.
Right, because you don't get bogged down in the details.
Exactly. It's about getting your idea out there quickly,
Yeah.
in its simplest form, and then letting the feedback guide you.
So we've seen it with Groupon, we've seen it with IMVU, we've seen it with Zappos. It feels like this whole launch with an MVP thing, it's a recurring theme in the lean startup. But what does an MVP actually look like in practice? Because it's got to be more than just like a hand-drawn PDF, right?
Oh, for sure. There are actually a few different types of MVPs. You got your Flintstone MVP like Groupon, where you're basically creating the illusion of a working product, even if it's all done manually behind the scenes. But there's also the concierge MVP. That's where you're providing a service manually to test your assumptions before you go and build out any complex tech.
Oh, interesting. So you're kind of like the human back end of your product.
Exactly. Ries gives the example of Aardvark, the question answering service. In the beginning, they didn't have any fancy algorithms, no AI, none of that. If someone asked a question, their team would literally find the answer themselves and send it back to the customer.
Wow. So they were like the human Google. That's dedication.
It was all manual, but it was brilliant. It let them test their core assumptions about the service without investing a ton in tech they might not even need. And they learned a ton from that concierge MVP. They ended up pivoting a bunch of times based on those learnings, and eventually they built a product that got them acquired by Google.
That's wild. It's amazing what you can learn from those early experiments, even when they're, a little scrappy. But I gotta say, I'd be a little nervous to put something out there that wasn't, totally polished. Wouldn't customers be turned off by a product that felt, I don't know, kind of low quality?
It's common fear.
Yeah.
But Ries argues that, honestly, a lot of times customers don't care as much about polish as we think they do.
They just want something that works.
Exactly. They care about whether the product solves their problem. He uses the example of IMVU, again, actually, their early avatar technology. They were really hesitant to release any features that weren't, completely done. They were worried it would come across as low quality.
So did they hold back, or did they take the leap?
They went for it. They released this very basic version of their avatar movement feature, where instead of walking smoothly, The avatars would just kind of teleport from one spot to another.
Oh, interesting. And what did people think?
People loved it.
They loved it, really.
Yeah, they thought it was great. They loved the simplicity. But more importantly, it gave IMVU a ton of valuable feedback that they used to build out the feature, make it even better.
It's like you're getting a head start on user testing, putting your product out there, letting real people tell you what works, what doesn't, instead of just, guessing in a vacuum.
Exactly. Takes out a lot of the guesswork, lets you make those decisions about your product based on actual data. It's like IU says, the only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else.
So true. Okay, so let's say we've gone through that first phase. We've built our MVP, got it into the hands of our customers, and we're starting to get that feedback. Then what? How do we know if we're on the right track? How do we measure our progress and decide whether to stick with our original plan or, change course completely?
Well, that's where this idea of innovation accounting comes in.
Innovation accounting.
Yeah, it might sound a little, intimidating at first, but it's actually really practical. Basically, it's about measuring what really matters for startups, for new businesses. And a lot of times, that's not the same stuff you'd measure in a traditional business.
So we're not just talking about revenue and profit.
Right. I mean, those things are important, obviously, but especially in those early stages, they can actually be kind of misleading.
Interesting. So what should startups be focusing on?
Ries is big on what he calls actionable metrics. So data points that actually give you information you can use. Data that tells you, are our assumptions right? Are we moving towards a business model that actually makes sense?
Can you give us an example? Like, what would that look like in the real world?
Sure. Ries talks about this company, Grocket. They did online test prep. And at first, they were tracking things like, total number of users, total number of practice questions answered.
Vanity metrics.
Exactly. Vanity metrics look good on a report, don't necessarily mean you're actually succeeding.
Right. So what happened with Grocket? Did those metrics tell the whole story?
Not even close. The numbers looked good, but behind the scenes, they weren't seeing the user engagement, the retention they needed. It wasn't translating into a sustainable business.
So how'd they figure that out?
They realized they'd fallen into that trap. They were focused on the wrong things. They had to dig deeper. And what they discovered was that their registration process, it was actually a huge bottleneck. They were making it way too easy for people to sign up without really understanding, what Grocket was all about.
So people were signing up, but they weren't actually using it.
Exactly. So they started doing A/B testing, experimenting with different versions of their registration process, seeing what worked best, what actually got people to stick around and use the product.
That's so interesting. Sometimes the smallest tweaks can make such a huge difference.
It's true. And just by going through that process, testing, iterating, they were able to get their activation and retention rates way up. They were finally moving the needle on the things that mattered.
It's all about finding those key indicators, right? The ones that really tell you how your business is doing.
Yep. And that all ties into this big question that Ries talks about, the whole pivot or persevere dilemma.
Right. Because after every experiment, every round of testing and feedback, you have to make a decision, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Are we seeing what we need to see? Are we validating our assumptions? Or is it time to make a change? Maybe even a big one.
It takes guts to do that, to be honest with yourself, even when it means letting go of an idea you love.
It really does. It's about having that humility to say, okay, that didn't work out how I planned, but I learned from it, and now I'm going to adjust. He has a great example of this in the book with Vodafone. They were the political activism platform.
Oh, yeah, I remember them. They went through a bunch of pivots, right?
They did. And each time it was based on what they were learning. So they started as this social network for verified voters, but they weren't seeing the engagement they wanted. So they pivoted to a platform where activists could pay to contact voters about specific issues.
Interesting. So they were constantly refining their approach, trying to find that, sweet spot.
Exactly. And when that second approach didn't quite work out either, they pivoted again. This time they went to a self-serve platform where anyone could pay to reach voters about any cause. And you know what's really interesting? Each pivot, it was faster than the last.
Oh, wow. So it's like they were getting better at the pivoting itself, more efficient, more adaptable.
They were becoming experts in learning from their experiments. It didn't even matter if the experiment was a success or a failure. They were learning either way, and that learning, it was making them faster.
That's fascinating. So it's really about embracing that mindset of continuous learning, always adapting, always iterating.
That's what the lean startup is all about. It's not about nailing it on the first try. It's about having the resilience to keep experimenting Keep learning, keep adjusting until you find a path to success.
So well said. As we wrap up our deep dive into the lean startup, is there one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with today?
Don't be afraid of the unknown. Don't shy away from uncertainty. This methodology, it gives you the tools to navigate that uncertainty, to test your assumptions, to turn them into knowledge. It's a journey of discovery, and it all starts with asking yourself one simple question. What can I test today?
That's a fantastic question and a perfect note to end on. To our listeners, what will you test? What will you learn? And how will you adapt? Until next time, happy experimenting.